to understand the profiles, you don't need to know all 12. You do need to know the relationship between the lines in the profiles. So what I'm really saying is that to understand the profiles, really understanding what each of those lines needs helps you see how the profile itself works. So we know the 1-3 needs to go deep into learning and exploring through learning and studying. We know the internet is a 1-3. If you look at the date of the birth of the internet, it's a 1-3 thing. Okay. Um, the 1 needs that informational foundation. The 3 doesn't need a foundation. The 3 needs to explore and experiment and try things out. It's an experiential learner. And to a certain degree, there's an inner conundrum with the 1-3 because the 1 doesn't want to get it wrong, right? And so oftentimes the 1-3 thinks, well, if I just study enough, if I just read enough, if I just learn enough, I'll know enough so that when I go explore or experiment, I'll get it right. And so, of course, as you know, if you are a third line, that doesn't work because the third line has to experience it to know whether it's true or not. And so the third line is oftentimes somewhat surprised that no matter how much you study, it doesn't work out the way you thought. And because of that, there's can sometimes be a fear of going out and trying because that fear of not being prepared, that's the fear of the 1, not the fear of the unknown, can oftentimes keep you from enjoying that experimental exploration thing that you're supposed to do when you're a third line. The 1-4 is a fairly rare profile. The 1-4 and the 4-1, there are 2 profiles that have a 1 and a 4 in them. The 1-4 and the 4-1 are both what I would call stabilizing energies. They have a theme or a life path that is often about bringing stability and consistency to the environments that they're in. The 1-4 and the 4-1 have to go deep with the informational foundation, just like the 1 and the 1-3. They need that informational foundation to feel stable and secure. And stability and security is a big, big deal for a 1-4 and a 4-1. So both of those profiles really don't, I'm not going to say they don't like change. The mature 4th line and even the mature 1st line enjoys change when they learn how to create a foundation of knowledge within themselves. So a good mantra for a 1-4 or a 4-1 would be, I'll know what I need to know when I need to know it. And I don't have to panic if I don't have the answers right now. I'm going to trust that my own inner sense of knowing is going to guide me to the right place at the right time, and I'll have everything I need. That takes a lot of years of practice for anyone who has a 4th line, especially. It takes a lot of years of practice to drop into that place of being resourced on the inner plane in order to make those changes, be able to make change with ease and grace. In the interim, the 1-4 and the 4-1 needs a depth of knowledge. And the 4th line, oftentimes we say the 4th line is like the party animal. They know everybody. They have friends in every town. I don't find that necessarily to be so true. I do find that the 4th line tends to go deep into their relationships. They want to go deep. They build deep foundations in their partnerships, their friendships, their relationships. That depth of that foundation oftentimes is friendship. Even in romantic partnerships, they can be good friends with the people they love, which is why oftentimes when they break up with people, they still stay friends because they go that deep. The depth of those relationships and the depth of that connection makes them take their time. They have to study and they have to build those intimacy bridges, those deep bonded relationships. It's not unusual to see like a 4th line profile, somebody who has a 4 in their profile, especially a 1-4 and a 4-1, to really like stay with their friends forever. Like they meet people in kindergarten and they're friends until until the end, right? So that's a natural and a normal thing for a 4-1 and a 4-2, a 4-1 and a 1-4. The 5-1, that we'll just go straight to the 5-1 because that's another 1st line profile. 5-1 is also a depth or a well of information. They also need that stability and strength of that foundation of information. The fifth line, though, has a very unique role. Fifth line is a visionary leader. So the fifth line has this energy field that is natural, it's part of who they are. The fifth line has that energy of what we call the projection field, or sometimes we call it karmic destiny. And the fifth line, when it moves through the world, has this reflection that it carries in its aura. And through that reflection, and it has to usually be a matching reflection, through that reflection, they attract people who can see themselves in that reflection. And so when you are a fifth line, people will see in you what they themselves oftentimes need to fix, what they themselves need to work on. But instead of seeing it as a mirror, instead of seeing, oh, this person is revealing this very important, intimate truth about me, what they'll see instead is that person is doing this, and that person is doing that, and that person is doing this. And those of you who are fifth line, you know what I'm talking about. And it's not really the fifth line that's doing it. It's oftentimes the projection, the expectation of the other person that the fifth line is either going to fix something broken in them, or that the fifth line is doing what they are actually themselves doing. That's the shadow of the fifth line. We don't often talk about the high expression of the fifth line. The high expression of the fifth line is the fifth line can see from its understanding, based on its research and studying, what the potential is in something. They can see the vision. They can see the big picture. Notice that we call it a projected. It's a projected. There's a projected element to the fifth line. We call it the projection field. In human design, when you hear the word projection, and there are lots of places where it shows up in the chart. This is, remember how I said there's just only really a handful of themes in the chart? There's projection for the projector. That's what we call it, the projector, right? There's the projection field of the fifth line. By the way, if you are a second line profile, you also have that too. Not to the same degree, but you have it too. There are projected gates and channels in the chart. So if you have, looking down at your chart, if you look at the spleen and the root center, you have the 1858. That 1858 is what's called a projected channel, meaning don't tell people what you know about how to make it better unless they ask, right? Because otherwise people don't hear it. So anything that's projected is has similar themes to projectors. A fifth line sees the potential, and they understand how to get us to the potential. That's the studying that they do with their first line if they're a 5-1. So that 5-1 has the ability, through their knowledge and their foundation, to lead people into the fulfillment through being very compelling, through the fulfillment of that potential. Now we're on to the 2. So 2-4. So, all right, the 2 is sometimes called the hermit. I like to call the 2 the responder. What also is a responder in human design? Don't all reply at once. The generator types, right? And so there's a certain generated quality up to the second line, a responding quality. If you have a second line in your profile, you need time alone. You need time alone. And that time alone is essential for you to integrate everything that you've been learning. And it's essential for you because I find usually the second lines, because just like the fifth line, they can see the potential. That's being able to see the potential is like being a very highly sensitive person. Fifth lines are like this too. You can see the potential. And because you can see the potential, you're oftentimes spending a lot of energy trying to get people to fulfill that potential, especially if you're a 2-4. Or you're spending a lot of time convincing people about the potential, and you're very sensitive because you can see it, and you need that alone time to regenerate. Is an irony in that second line energy. If you're a second line and you go hide, you go take your hermit break to restore your energy, to integrate what you've learned. When you start to feel lonely, if you're a 2-4, because the two needs that alone time. The 4 needs companionship. The 4 needs that depth of that relationship that we talked about when we talked about the 1-4 and the 4-1. The 2 has this kind of conundrum in its profile, right? I mean, the 2-4 has sort of a conundrum in the profile. The 2 wants to be alone and hermit. The 4 wants to be deeply connected. So the 2 goes away and it hermits, but then the 4 part of your profile gets lonely. But as a 2, you can't just go out because it's a responding line. You have to wait for people to call you out. Well, here's the thing. If you're a second line profile, you have like this giant aura. You don't realize you do. You think you're hiding and you're alone, but really what's happening is when you go be alone to restore, restock, regenerate, replenish, when you get your cup full, your aura starts sending out beacons. Here I am, come back, come find me. And people start calling you from out of the blue, and they will literally call you out. They'll call you out. If you're a 2-4, they'll call you out to go back into your relationships, to go be the friend, the partner, the connected person, until that 4th line is like, okay, that's enough. I got to go back to my hermit hole. And you're always doing this dance between go out, stay in. Here's the thing about the 2-4. This is just a fun fact about 2-4s. If you are a 2-4, you never want to go to the party, never. And then when you go to the party, you never want to go home until the end. So you always have that dilemma going. All right, the 2-5. The 2-5 has that hermit piece and then that projection piece that we talked about. So really the 2-5s and the 5-2s both, they can be the ultimate hiders. Like they can hide out like nobody's business, because oftentimes, if we're honest, in the shadow of the 2-5, they're often really kind of dismayed. They're disappointed. They're kind of like reflectors in some ways. They can see the potential, right? They see the potential of everything. And oftentimes they have to go retreat, that second line energy. They have to go retreat because they're exhausted from trying to drag people in the potential. So the 2-5 can really, really hide out. And oftentimes, especially, here's the thing I didn't say about the 5th line. It can be really challenging to have people project expectations onto you, or to project their own healing needs onto you, or to project whatever onto you. And those of you who are 5th lines, you know that can be extraordinarily painful and difficult. Here's the thing. You work on your own self-worth. You get your own inner value and your alignment in place. And anything we talked about in this program helps you with that. When you can hold that energy, that alignment with authenticity, those projections slide right off of your aura like Teflon. So you as a 5th line owe it to yourself so that you don't get projected on too much. You owe it to yourself to work on the self-worth piece, because when you work on the self-worth piece, then it makes it difficult for people to project expectations on you. And even if they do, you don't even hear it. You don't see it. So you don't absorb it and you don't become responsible for it, and it doesn't become personal. The 6-2 is, okay, we haven't talked about the 6th line yet. The 6th line. Let's talk about the 6th line before we talk about the 6-2. And then we're going to be almost close to covering all the profiles. So the 6 has a triphasic life cycle, as we talked about. So the 6 starts off their life feeling and acting like a 3rd line. That happens until about the age of 30. Then they go through a major life cycle change from 30 until about 50. We call that second cycle being on the roof. So the first cycle of the 6th line from birth to 30, they act and feel like a 3rd line. They're trying and experimenting with everything. You always want to look at what's the other line in the 6th line profile, because that's going to tell you some things about what it's learning about. So if we look at the 6-2, and we remember that the 6th line is experimenting and exploring until the age of 30, the 6-2 is experimenting and exploring with being seen or not being seen. And so oftentimes the 6-2 in that 3rd line phase is either hiding out and not being seen at all, the ultra hermit, or they're out here doing all this stuff, not taking that restorative, regenerative time that they need, and burning out massively at the end of their 20s. So the 6-2 is often exploring and experimenting with what do I need to respond to? How do I meter out my energy so that I stay sustainable and I know what to respond to? That second phase that the sixth line goes through from 30 to about 50 is all about healing everything they've experimented with in the beginning of their 30s. Now, it is taught that the sixth line stops experimenting when they turn 30 or they come to the end of their Saturn return, their first Saturn return. I actually don't really think that's true. I think what happens is the exploration and the experimentation process matures. And so the sixth line, especially the sixth line later on in life, has wisdom about what's worth exploring and experimenting with or not. It doesn't mean they don't experiment. It means they do it very with great awareness. That's also true, by the way, of the third line. If you have a third line in your profile, as you mature, you're not going to just explore and experiment with everything at a certain point. You're going to get maturity from learning how to experiment, from being an expert in the experimental process about what you're going to experiment with. Same is true for the sixth line. So the sixth line goes through the second phase from 30 to 50. We call it being on the roof. It's supposed to be a time of healing. It's supposed to be a time of resting. The 6-2 goes up on the roof. And if you're a 6-2, you go up on the roof, you don't ever want to come down. In fact, we oftentimes say that the 6-2, when it's time for them to step out into the third and final phase of their life around the age of 50, you have to pry them off with a crowbar because they don't want to come down. They like being a hermit. They like stopping everything. So that second phase is really oftentimes where things slow down. The intensity of their youth goes away. Oftentimes the sixth line up on the roof is healing. They've got their head down. Oftentimes their energy kind of goes down to the pilot light. They don't feel as vivacious and lively as they used to. They think they're aging. They think they're borderline depressed, and they're not. It's a time of stillness. It's a 20-year time of stillness. And the purpose of that cycle is about resting, renewing, regenerating, healing, learning, getting on focus, finding your mission and your purpose, which if a sixth line doesn't feel like they have connection to their mission and their purpose, they can panic. And that cycle is really a time when they're supposed to really conserve their energy and be ready, because the sixth line technically is actually a late bloomer, even though they're always in a hurry. At 50, they come off the roof. And when they come off the roof, then they emerge as somebody who's tried everything and somebody who's learned from their own challenges and their own explorations about what works and what doesn't. So again, the way in which they step into that mature leadership role is oftentimes influenced by the other line in their profile. So the 6-2 gets called out, right? That sixth line energy, when it's time for it to go back out into the world and be the role model, be that adept that's learned from their experiences, usually they get some kind of a call that forces them to have to go out and serve from that integrated place. The 4-6 is a six line profile, because remember I said you want to look at the other line to see what is the third, what are they going to be learning about and exploring. So the fourth line is often exploring and experimenting in their youthful phase with relationships, right? So they're usually the ones that are like dating all the wrong people in all the wrong relationships. That's their job in their early 30s, is to learn about relationships, oftentimes through the crash and burn learning strategy. The fourth line goes deep, deep, deep in relationships. Remember, the sixth line wants a soulmate. So the 4-6 is often really disappointed in people. Again, and most importantly, they're disappointed in the quality of connection that they have with the people in their life. They don't want to make small talk. They don't want to just be, acquaintances. They want to have deep, rich, go to the bone friendships and relationships in every area of their life. And oftentimes they're very disappointed if they have superficial relationships or acquaintanceships, or they have to make small talk. Small talk, by the way, is the definition of hell for anyone with a six line profile. The 2-5 we talked about. The 3-5. Oh, the 3-5 is our last one, right? Oh, and the 3-6. Okay, the 3-5 3-5 is exploring and experimenting. That's number one priority. What happens if I try this? And remember, when you're an experimenter, it doesn't usually end up perfect the first time out the chute, right? And so when it gets out of the chute and it tries something and it doesn't work out, the unconscious is a projection field. They can see the perfection, they can see the potential, but they're over here experimenting. And there can be a real disconnect between how do I get to the fulfillment of potential until again they mature that exploration process and they give themselves a little bit of slack for not getting it right the first time out the chute. So if you're a 3-5 or a 1-3 or a young 6 line or a mature 6 line, for God's sakes, give yourself some slack to figure things out experientially. It's okay if you don't get it right the first time. In fact, it's important that you don't. In fact, if you're getting it right the first time, you're probably not getting it right. You're probably making it way too small and totally feasible because you're not brave enough to go hog wild with the exploration, which is what you actually need to be doing if it's the right thing for you to do. So please, 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 all my 3rd lines and 6 lines, go try stuff and get it wrong. Because when you're getting it wrong, you're actually getting it right. And that's the pathway for you to really learn, how do I lead people? This is for my 3-5s. How do I lead people in the fulfillment of the potential? Well, I don't know, but I'm going to go try it. And from my explorations and my trying it, I'm going to know where the pitfalls are so that I'm a better leader when it comes to helping people reach that potential. That's the role of the 3-5. But sometimes because we expect perfection from everyone for no reason. I mean, who gets things perfect? Well, no one, right? And who gets things perfect first time out the chute? Really no one. Maybe the 4-1s and the 1-4s, but it takes them a long time to get there. The 3rd lines don't have that kind of patience. They got to go try it, right? So when we can stop, when you're a 3rd line, a 3-5, when you can go, okay, I'm just going to let go. Not easy. I'm going to let go of what everybody thinks of my experimental process and let myself do it. Because in doing it, I'll get better at leading. I'll get better at helping people fulfill the potential. We don't know this stuff usually until we're older. Hopefully, it's my fantasy life that everybody will get a reading at least in their 20s and they don't have to figure this out later with great pain. 6-3 was the last one. 3-6 and 6-3. Think about this for a minute. We've been talking a lot about you don't have to get it right. You don't have to get it perfect the first time. The 6-3 and the 3-6, when they are young, before the age of 30, they are double 3s. You are an experimenter, explorer, period, the end. And you're here to experiment and explore with experimenting and exploring. That's your job. And it never stops. It never stops. You will always learn how to fulfill the full potential of who you are through trying it out, through experimenting with it, by getting it right first, by trying everything that didn't work. And that's okay. You need to have that experimental process. That experimental process is essential because the more you experiment with experimenting and the more you learn about how do we experiment effectively, how do we experiment with awareness and deliberation so that we are embracing this exploration process as an essential part of learning how to do it well. The more you learn how to do that, the more you show other people how to do that simply by being yourself.